Well, it's been interesting watching or reading the IDF Twitter accounts and the Instagram accounts of in the Israel official accounts, and just seeing the level of propaganda that comes out of them and the comments from people under them that uncritically believe what they say and enthusiastically embrace what they say and the statements that they put out. So imagining, being an Israeli surrounded by that constantly, I have to think it has to be hard to break away from that and to not believe, the things that they're feeding you. To be surrounded, I'm just like trying to put myself into that. If you're bombarded by those fake statements every day, and it has to be very difficult.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Some people say that Israeli society is like Sparta. And I agree with that to a certain degree, because it's not only about militarism. But there is no distinction between civil life and military life in Israel. In no way. First of all,
That's really profound, actually. Yeah, that's part of the problem, isn't it? Yeah.
So first of all, which is the most popular radio station, for example? Even though people don't listen to radio, they in the Spotify era, but up until recently, which was the most popular radio station in Israel? It was the IDF radio station.
Wow.
Actually, they were the best quality radio, I must say, compared to the others. They had the best music.
Radio, or did they play? Oh, they played music. Oh, wow.
Yeah. The thing is that if you listen to their newscasts, for example, there's no difference whatsoever between their newscast and the so-called civil radio station. That tells us something about the others, not about the IDF.
Yeah, they're stenographers.
We know that the IDF does propaganda. They don't do very good propaganda, but they do propaganda. But what about the rest?
Yeah, they're being stenographers. Yeah, they're not doing journalism.
In Israel, there is no real difference between being a policeman and being a soldier. There is the border police, which we are very familiar with, which are many times they are the ones who appear in these horrible videos of assaults on Palestinians. They're border police. Border police are basically soldiers, Israeli soldiers. They get drafted into the army, but instead of serving the army, they serve in the police station with the police. They have police privileges, etc., police rights. And this is how it evolves. Also, obviously, the whole discourse, the whole attitude, the whole lingo, everything is military based. Usually, high-ranking officials in the army, when they end their military career, they go to either run a certain company or they go to run a school. I don't know why, but this is something that happens quite a bit. They become headmasters of schools.
Oh my!
When people learn Arabic at schools, the textbooks are printed by the Ministry of Defense, and the Ministry of Defense tells the schools how many classes of Arabic we want you to have, because there's also the alternative of learning French, but most popular is Arabic. People learn the other people's language not in order to communicate with the other people, not in order to understand the other culture. They learn their language in order to control them. And they also learn Fusha, not Amiyah. They learn the written language, not the spoken. So those people who afterwards serve in the military and they go through the newspapers and they abuse their use of the language in order to basically go after Palestinians in every possible way. If they go down the street and they try to speak to a Palestinian, they can't, because they don't speak spoken language. They only, it's never about learning about the other culture. It's never about, what's called coexistence. It's the exact opposite. It's about, oppression. This is the type of education. When I used to pick up my niece from kindergarten, you walk into the kindergarten and there is thing in pretty much every kindergarten. It says "My Israel," and then you have the picture of the chief of staff. You have the military chief of staff. You have the people of the picture of the prime minister. You have the anthem, which is a racist text, or at least supremacist. I mean, I don't know if there's a difference. Anyway, it's a racist text. You have a map of Israel, obviously no borders. It's the entire land, which is actually something positive about it, that there are no green line. There is no the green line. There is no differentiation between West Bank, Gaza, and the rest of it. But there are also, but they don't draw any borders. There's all these stereotypical depictions of, in the south you have camels and Bedouins and things like that. Obviously, all of these. I mean, from the get-go, from literally from kindergarten, they indoctrinate people to think in a certain way, or to not think in a certain way. Later on also comes the role of the army. Even in the kindergarten, many kindergartens, they basically collect sweets and stuff to send to the soldiers in the front, and things like that. And on and on. So this is the type of mentality that you have. And it's very difficult to break away from that. So the military is in everyday life. If you buy a falafel on uniform, you get a discount. Okay, things like that. This is, people revere the army. They kind of, you're our sons, our protectors, etc. And also it's something they can relate to because everyone was in the army. And if they weren't, they will never be. And if they didn't happen to actually serve in the army, they will not feel comfortable with that. So they will pretend as if they did serve in the army. That's the type of society. Another thing, when we talk about media, the media colludes with the army. Every single media in Israel. First of all, there used to be these weekly meetings with the media, with a military representative, where they would brief the media, and they have to play along. I mean, basically, they have to play along with whatever the military authorities dictate about the discourse, etc. If they don't participate in these meetings, or if they don't go play along, they will not get these debriefings, which were very valuable to them.
I see.
Another thing that happens, I can send you the video of how there is this. You see this discussion between, you have the New York Times, a representative of the New York Times, and you have a representative of the Wall Street Journal and some other American newspaper and Haaretz newspaper, and they're sitting with someone who was the chief, basically whatever, someone who is a military official, and they're talking about some military operation, and they all say that the moment that this event happened, they immediately called up the military spokesperson or this or that. They have very good ties, and they report they are a mouthpiece for the Israeli military spokesperson. Both Haaretz and the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, there's no difference about that. They're all basically totally colluding, happily doing so. And they also say that they fully trust whatever they're being told in that meeting. They say that they fully trust whatever they're being told by the spokesperson. Not all propaganda looks like those formula.
True.
Real effective propaganda doesn't make up the facts. Haaretz reports the facts. Just make sure not to read a single line of analysis, political analysis there.
Right.
The moment you do, you're doomed. You've been brainwashed.
It's like,
so good. That's such a good point.
It's like how we have leftist grass tops here that reframe the argument to sell it to progressives, right? So you have the right-wing argument, you have the left-wing argument, but they're all trying to sell a certain message to whatever their base is, right? So they go about that in two different ways. I mean, we see it here in the United States, and really in many ways, it's the same as half of the Democratic Party just enabling the right wing in the country.
Like a Neera Tanden think progress, like those people. 100%. I got it.
It's the same.
I gotcha.
Yeah. Remember these phrases I mentioned before?
It's just not clear for us.
Yeah, remember these phrases: Israel and Palestine, the Israeli left. What was it? Israeli democracy. Just a few examples. Anytime that you see these phrases, you know that you're reading a propaganda piece. Mm-hmm. The moment that the term Israel and Palestine is being used, not referring to the very same territory, the entire land, that's propaganda as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
It's a subtle form of propaganda, but it is much more effective because it lends legitimacy to what Israel is doing. It says, yes, not all is bad. Netanyahu is the great evil. No, Netanyahu is not the great evil. He's just the latest in a long line of great evils. And actually probably not as dangerous as, say, Benny Gantz, who is the alternative, say. Benny Gantz, in his election campaign, the very first video of his election campaign, and Benny Gantz is regarded as a leftist of sorts, even though he was the military chief of staff. The very first video in Benny Gantz's election campaign was, you have the numbers running on the screen, and it's about how many people they killed in the previous assault on Gaza. And he was unapologetic about it, and he was saying, look, this is as much terrorists that we killed in Gaza. This was the leftist alternative to Netanyahu. The so-called left always has to prove itself much more in the eyes of this Sparta community, society, than the right wing. The right wing, you know, they're already there. The so-called left, they are the ones who usually initiated the wars, not the right. They're the ones who are much more dangerous in many regards, but they have this aura of legitimacy, this like this kind of shield of legitimacy that is handed to them by the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and Harvard and all of those. While they're just as dangerous and maybe even more so.